Hey, Mr. Poilievre, a very good morning to you.
Good morning to you. Thank you very much, and happy Gurpurab to you and your listeners.
Thank you so much, and happy Gurpurab to you as well. Mr. Poilievre, lots going on in the country, especially as far as work stoppages are concerned.
Yes.
The port work stoppage has been, the workers are back to work, but now they're saying that they want to go for a charter challenge. Canada Post employees, they walked off the job last night. What's your take on this?
This is the unavoidable consequence of Justin Trudeau causing the worst inflation in 40 years. Last year, we had more strikes than in any year since 1983. And what was happening in 1983? Pierre Elliott Trudeau had caused the worst inflation in a generation. So here's the cycle. Governments create cash, they drive up taxes, you get inflation. Workers realize their wages can't pay their bills anymore. They demand raises that their employers can't afford, and what happens? We get strikes. And I don't blame the workers. They're just trying to recoup what they lost through the government-induced inflation. But at the same time, it causes massive disruption to our economy. The moral of the story is governments must stop printing money, taxing food and other essentials, because when you have inflation, you have strikes and everything melts down. Everything is broken after 9 years of Justin Trudeau and the NDP Liberal government. They are not worth the cost, crime, and corruption.
When we see this the inflationary pressures that we've had over the last few years, that's been a global phenomenon, some say, and we've seen those inflationary pressures in other countries as well. So, and Canada cannot be immune to those. To what's happening across the globe. So how fair is it to pin the inflation on the government itself?
Very. It's the only cause. It's literally the only cause of our inflation is the government. Countries like Switzerland have had no inflation, even though they're right in the middle of Europe. The rest of Europe had lots of inflation. Why? Well, Switzerland balanced its budget. Switzerland didn't print money, and so they don't have inflation. You look here at home, we've had the worst housing inflation of any country in the G7. We don't import our homes from the rest of the world. Our land is already here. We've had 36% more food price inflation in Canada than in the United States. And that gap corresponds with the carbon tax on the farmers who grow our food and the truckers who ship our food. So Justin Trudeau and the NDP Liberal government are to blame. They've printed $700 billion to double our national debt. They've imposed a carbon tax that they now want to quadruple to 61 cents a liter. When you tax energy, you tax everything. So my common sense plan is to axe the carbon tax to bring down energy, heat, food, and other costs, cap government spending and cut government waste with a dollar-for-dollar law requiring we find $1 of savings for every new dollar of spending, so we never print money to fund and cause inflation again. And let's take the GST off new homes to save people up to 50 grand on a new home. I also encourage provinces to match that by taking the PST off. I mean, over $100,000 would come off the price of a home, and there would be hundreds of thousands of new homes built stimulated by this tax cut. Axe the sales tax on new homes, axe the carbon tax, cut income tax, and get rid of government bureaucracy and waste to pay for it.
When you say getting rid of government bureaucracy and cutting the waste, the results of the U.S. election and the steps being taken by the incoming Trump administration have been a point of discussion across the globe, especially the Department of Government Efficiency.
Yeah.
Do you plan on establishing such a department should you become Prime Minister to find the savings that could be found within the government expenditure?
No, I think we need more. I think we need fewer government departments, not more. And I intend to eliminate bureaucracy, cut back on the $21 billion that the government of Canada is spending on consultants. That's $1,400 per Canadian family on federal consultants alone. I will get rid of that. I'll get rid of the infrastructure bank that hasn't completed a single infrastructure program, the pharmacare program that hasn't given out a single pill or treatment of medication, the corporate welfare programs that give checks to well-connected companies that are either too incompetent to raise their own money or are using the profits to pad their pockets. We're going to be cutting all of that garbage, and we'll use the savings to bring down the deficit and the taxes for our people.
Would there still be a task force? Because all the list that you just mentioned, somebody would still need to go through that and then make recommendations as to how many cuts need to take place.
That's an interesting idea. Interesting idea. Let me think about that.
Yeah. Mr. Poilievre, you mentioned...
You like that? What do you think of what they're doing in the States?
Well, I think it depends as to what the results of that are going to be. Is there waste within government? And if that waste is cut out, what kind of service impacts are we going to see?
Yeah.
I think that's where that's going to be the litmus test of the impact on the average on the average citizen in the U.S. Do those cuts make lives better, make services better, or does access to services become even more difficult? So I think that remains to be seen.
Well, this is the question I have for people. Trudeau and the NDP Liberals have increased government spending by 85% in a decade. Are you getting 85% better federal government services?
Yeah, that's a question that I think people can answer.
But just because something costs more
doesn't mean
that it's better.
Yeah.
It's like saying, well, I went to the best restaurant in the Lower Mainland yesterday. Oh, yeah, what was so great about it? Well, they charged me $1,000. It must be good because it was really expensive. Well, what about the ambiance? It was terrible. What about the food? It was awful. The service? Oh, we waited for hours, but it must be the best because we spent the most on it. That's the government mentality. We're judging success by how expensive things could be. Government should be cheaper than ever. With new technology, we should be able to deliver more and better services at a lower cost. But if you look at all the things government does, they're becoming more and more expensive to deliver worse and worse results. Look at housing. Trudeau spent $80 billion on affordable housing. And what's the result? Housing costs have actually doubled. So just because the government is spending billions of dollars on a problem doesn't mean that it's going to get any better. In fact, the more government gets involved in our lives, the worse our lives become. Yeah. We need less government and more freedom.
Cutting a check is not a panacea. But that being said, would you keep the dental care program that the federal government has put in place?
Well, we want to figure out who's getting it and who's benefiting and at what cost. So far, we're finding out that by the government's own admission, 96% of Canadians have gotten absolutely nothing from this program. That's just based on the government's own published numbers.
But the program's not been rolled out fully in its entirety yet either.
I know they've only had 9 years. So they promised that if we just keep giving money to all of their programs, that one day down the road, something is going to happen. But who has benefited is Sun Life. The insurance company is getting a $750 million contract to run this. And that's what we see with all these Liberal programs, is that it's called trickle-down government. They take your money, they give it to bureaucrats who give it to, in this case, an insurance company, who then they claim they're going to give the money to someone else, and then someone's going to give it to your dentist, and you're going to get your filling done. But at the end of the day, you don't get back nearly as much as you put in with the Trudeau government. He's not worth the cost, crime or corruption. Look, pharmacare program. Not one drug has actually been given to anyone, and now they're saying they want to take away your private plan. They want a single-payer government plan, which means if you're a unionized worker and you've negotiated a private drug plan, you're going to lose it because they want it to be only government plans. The school food program hasn't served a single meal. It's feeding bureaucracy, not kids. The housing accelerator fund hasn't built a single home. So, we're building up these monstrous Ottawa bureaucracies. You pay for it, but you don't get anything for it.
Mr. Poilievre, when election takes place in Canada sometime next year, it seems like, it has to happen before or by October of next year, the results and what happens in the U.S. is going to loom large on our political narrative here. We have had record numbers of people moving to the U.S., even those who were born in Canada have moved to the U.S. in the last few years. The economic conditions in the U.S. and in Canada, there is a stark difference. I remember a few days ago in the House of Commons, you referenced an article from the New York Times, was it?
Yes.
Which was talking about how Canadians were making more money about 10, 12 years ago, but now the situation has flipped.
Yes, and the New York Times wrote an article, said, welcome to Canada, the home of the world's most affluent middle class in 2015. That was the last year of the Harper government. In it, they point out that median income was actually equal between Canadians and Americans. Fast forward to present, the per capita GDP, or income per person, is now $22,000 higher in the U.S. versus Canada when you measure it both in U.S. dollars. 22,000 U.S. dollars. That's over 30,000
Canadian.
and that's just in one decade. You think about it. This is the Americans. This is the Canadians. This is the gap that has happened. Our per capita GDP in Canada is actually lower than it was a decade ago, while the Americans have grown almost 20%. This is a staggering phenomenon. We've had a 70% increase in Canadians leaving to go live in the United States. $500 billion more Canadian investment dollars have gone south to the States than have come back. And that's Canadian money building American pipelines, businesses, technology, and jobs for American workers.
But given the kind of tax cuts that the Trump administration is promising
get
for
worse.
the corporations, this outflow could only increase.
It's going to accelerate because it's on top of that, Trudeau wants to raise taxes. He's planning a 61 cent a liter carbon tax. All the trucks that deliver food to your grocery store, parts to factories and warehouses, they're going to go to the States. Donald Trump is going to be on the phone calling our businesses saying, hey, you don't want to pay the carbon tax in Canada? No problem. Drive 50 kilometers south down here. We'll take your business. We'll take your jobs. You can leave the poverty behind. And
so what's our strategy then? Cut taxes, but then do we have the room to cut taxes? The revenue loss that's going to occur, how do we make up for that loss?
Two ways. One, we have to cut wasteful spending and bureaucracy. We have to bring in a dollar for dollar law that requires we find $1 of savings for every new dollar of spending. We need to unleash growth in this country. Again, we've had no growth in 10 years. So repeal the anti-energy law C-69 to unleash the production of Canadian oil, gas, mining, pipelines, LNG liquefaction plants. You know, the biggest single infrastructure project in Canadian history is LNG Canada in northwestern British Columbia, $40 billion, totally privately funded, approved by the previous Conservative government. I want to have 20 of those across the country to sell our clean, green Canadian gas to Asia and Europe, who are crying out for that gas. That would bring home tens of billions of dollars of revenues from abroad to bolster our dollar and generate tax revenues for our governments without raising taxes. In fact, we need to cut taxes to bring in more revenue because taxes crush growth. By having a pro-growth, bring-it-home tax cut, we can generate the growth that will pay our bills and reduce our debt levels.
Mr. Poilievre, last question, and a very important one as well. We've seen the rates of crime go up over the last few years, but especially the kind of sectarian tensions that we saw play out in Brampton and Surrey over the last few weeks between the Hindu community and the Sikh community. That has been very disturbing for a majority of the community members on either sides, and largely for Canadians as well, for everybody. What would you like to say to that? What's our best way to make sure that kind of stuff does not happen here in Canada?
Well, two parts. Justin Trudeau has divided Canadians. His radical woke ideology seeks to divide people into ethno-religious and other groupings rather than treating everyone as a Canadian. And that's why we have a 251% increase in police-reported hate crimes under Trudeau. 100 churches have been burned or vandalized. Mosques, synagogues, temples, gurdwaras have all been victims of terrorist and other attacks. We need to stop the division, treat everyone like a Canadian. Everyone from everywhere is welcome to come. Bring your culture, bring your family, bring your traditions, bring your stories, bring festivals and bring religious celebrations like the 55th birthday of Guru Nanak Dev Ji.
Yeah.
That's all wonderful. But the great thing about Canada is you get to leave the problems behind. So this should be a country where everyone is united, whether your name is Smith or Singh, Poilievre or Patel, Martin or Mohammed, Chang or Charles. You're a Canadian first, and we should bind ourselves together on that. And secondly, we need to lock up. Your second question was about crime.
Yeah.
It's a different section. And overall crime is out of control. It's a very simple reason. We're releasing criminals onto the streets to do crime. We don't have a lot of criminals in Canada. 40 offenders, 40 in Vancouver were arrested 6,000 times.
Yeah.
40 guys.
Yeah.
Lock them up. I'm bringing in a law that says jail, not bail. You won't be eligible for bail if you have a rap sheet and you're newly arrested. It will be jail, not bail. No parole, no probation, no house arrest, behind bars. Secure the borders with high-powered scanners to intercept drugs and guns. And finally, let's ban hard drugs, defund opioids, put the money in treatment and recovery to bring our loved ones home drug-free.
Mr. Poilievre, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for taking the time to
Thank
speak
you.
with us.
Axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, stop the crime.
Thank you.
Thank you.